The newest Pokemon TCG set, Stellar Crown, has been available on Pokemon TCG Live for over a week now, so we're going to look at tournament results from online events and see what decks are coming out on top in this new fresh metagame. We'll begin with the results of a tournament held on September 16th with 216 participants. This was a Swiss round only tournament, so let's look at the 8-0 deck here, which was actually Miraidon EX. So Miraidon EX gains the new tool of Area Zero Underdepths, a very strong stadium card that allows you to have up to 8 Pokemon on your bench instead of 5, so long as you have a Terra Pokemon in play. The other thing that's really strong about this is that if your opponent bumps this stadium, either playing their own or using an attack, or plays Lost Vacuum, and you had more than 5 Pokemon, now when you have to discard down to 5, you can get rid of some of those weaker liabilities like Squawkabilly, Luminion V, maybe even Mew EX, depending on the attacks that your opponent can use. Now note that Area Zero Underdepths does need you to have a Terra Pokemon in play in order to use its effect, so the Terra Pokemon that Miraidon decks are choosing, at least for the most frequent Terra Pokemon that Miraidon decks are choosing, is this Mewtwo EX from Paradox Rift, because it is a lightning type Pokemon and it is Terra. So Miraidon EX can search for this. You can never use this as an attacker because this deck plays 0 ways to satisfy Psychic Energy requirement, but this is just a 230 HP bench sitter that can't be hit by bench damage, and it satisfies that Terra tag, and you can just search it out very easily with your Miraidon EX's tandem unit. So this is just a bench sitter to satisfy the Terra requirement for Area Zero Underdepths, and other than that, this is pretty much the same Miraidon EX deck that you all know and love. They are using this kind of build with 2 Mew EX and 4 Ultra Ball to use Mew EX as a pretty frequent draw engine for the deck, even if it's just a couple of cards. A lot of times all you need to find is like a manual attachment or an Arven to get going, so just a couple of cards can really be all the difference for this kind of deck. What's really cool about these online events is that you can look at the matchups for each deck, so we can see exactly what this 8-0 Miraidon EX player beat on the way to 8-0. Now, I will note that there were 0 Charizards in their matchups, and Charizard is typically one of Miraidon's worst, if not the worst matchup. And I also don't think that this would fare well against stall decks either. So lucky enough to dodge Charizard decks and stall decks, but taking out a pretty wide variety of the rest of the metagame here with these matchups. Moving on to second place, we've got another old deck, which is Regidrago V-Star, and this one will be playing exactly 0 new cards. Regidrago V-Star is still a good deck. It just doesn't gain anything new, and also it now has to compete with regular Dragapult EX decks because they've got the Crystal A-Spec that makes attacking a whole lot easier. And Regidrago V-Star, while it could use Briar and attack with Ogerpon, it's a little awkward to fit into here, so Regidrago V-Star doesn't have a lot of use from these newer cards like the Crystal, like Briar, and so it seems like the decks that can use Briar effectively and frequently to close out games are the ones that are a little bit more on top in Japan's meta right now. But we see here Regidrago V-Star still able to go 7-1. Let's see what it played against in this tournament. So it played against a good spread of decks, 2 Dusknoir style decks, 3 Dragapult decks, and beat all of them. Its only loss was against the 8-0 Miraidon. In third place at a 7-1 record was Aegislash. So this is a super interesting deck using that new Grand Tree A-Spec. So let's just take a quick look at that. Grand Tree is a stadium card A-Spec that says once during each player's turn, that player may search their deck for a stage 1 Pokemon that evolves from one of their basic Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. If that Pokemon was evolved in this way, that player may search their deck for a stage 2 Pokemon that evolves from that Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. Then that player shuffles their deck. This card says the word Pokemon an absurd amount of times, but basically if you have a basic Pokemon that would be allowed to evolve, you can use this to search your deck for a stage 1 Pokemon to evolve onto it, and then a stage 2 to put on top of that stage 1. So this is great for something like this Aegislash deck that's going to play rare candies, but also wants another way to get out these evolutions, because Aegislash is essentially a stage 2 Mimikyu. It has the ability Mysterious Shield, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon EX and V, and then it has Hard Bashing, 120, and it goes through all effects. So this can wall out anything that Mimikyu would wall out, except this has 150 HP, so it can't just be sniped by Dusknors. It can't be as dealt with as easily as something like a Mimikyu, especially when this deck is running 2 Luxurious Cape to bring the Aegislash all the way up to 250 health. And what's really neat about Aegislash is that it has the Aegislash EX as a closer, potentially, or just you could drop this out of nowhere and do more damage than your opponent is expecting you to do. So it has the Peerless Edge attack that does 70 for each prize card you've taken. So this is a really good finisher. If you've taken 4 prize cards, this is doing 280 for 1 energy. That can easily finish out the game with your last 2 prize cards you need to take. And then it has the Double-Edged Slash, which does 220 and 30 damage to itself. So if you already have a Hone Edge with an energy on it, and you can evolve up into this and attach another, you could do 220 out of nowhere, which is more than your opponent is expecting, since the other Aegislash, which is our main attacker, only does 120. One last card I want to highlight in this Aegislash deck is Colress's Tenacity, because this allows for a pretty consistent turn 2 Aegislash. As long as your opponent knocks something out on their turn, you can go Colress's Tenacity, search for Grand Tree and Reversal Energy, Grand Tree up into an Aegislash, attach your Reversal Energy, and you've established an Aegislash that is swinging for 120 and can't be hit by EX and V Pokemon. So at the very least, Colress's Tenacity gets your evolution going. So if you're worried about, well, Mimikyu's more consistent because it's a basic Pokemon, this deck is actually built to be pretty consistent at getting Aegislashes up and attacking. And of course, let's check out what this 3rd place Aegislash deck lost to. It went 7-1, beating multiple Raging Bolts, multiple Roaring Moon decks, a Charizard and a Dragapult, even beat Snorlax Stall. So it beat a good spread of decks, eventually losing to the Miraidon that went 8-0 in the final round. And that's likely going to be because Mew EX can swing through Aegislash. Although the Aegislash deck is running Lost City, the Miraidon deck was running 2 Mew EXs, so I imagine that's where the problem came up. 4th place for this event was Raging Bolt EX. Let's take a look at this deck list. The only new card here is Briar, but that's okay because it's a pretty darn impactful card. Although Raging Bolt itself is not a Terra Pokemon, Teal Mask Ogerpon is. So Briar says you can only use this card if your opponent has exactly 2 prize cards remaining. During this turn, if your opponent's active Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an attack used by your Terra Pokemon, take 1 more prize card. This is specifically very, very good for Raging Bolt against Charizard, because historically, if you take a single prize KO against Charizard as your opening knockout, you pretty much lost the game. But now, if you go down to 5, they go down to 4, you go down to 3, they go down to 2, now you can Briar, knock out a Charizard with Teal Mask Ogerpon and take 3 prizes to win the game. So this can be used, of course, against any deck that goes down to 2 prizes and that you can knock out something with your Teal Mask Ogerpon, but specifically it should be very helpful against the Charizard matchup. And this Raging Bolt that got 4th was another 7-1 deck, and its only loss was again to that Miraidon that went 8-0. Is Miraidon that good? Was that player having a hot streak? These questions need to be answered, but Raging Bolt was able to defeat 2 Dragapult decks, a Charizard deck, a Gardevoir, 2 Roaring Moons, and a mirror match. So Charizard being historically a tough matchup, Gardevoir being historically a tough matchup. The Dragapult Pidgeot decks, I think, are now favored for Raging Bolt, so hit a pretty good spread of decks here and was able to dominate against everything but the Miraidon. Next, we've got something pretty new at 7-1 in 5th place, is a Terrapagos deck. Now, there's a lot of new cards in this one, actually, to cover. So, Terrapagos EX is kind of the poster card of the new Stellar Crown set. It's a Terra Pokemon, of course. It has Unified Beatdown to do 30 damage times the amount of benched Pokemon you have. So, typically you'll be attacking with this with a double turbo on, so that adds the -20 debuff to your attacks. So if you have a full bench of 8 with area 0 under depths, that's 240 minus 20 for the DTE. This swings 220 for a DTE. Not that bad. Now, it does have another attack that nobody has made great use of yet that I've seen, but I do think it has potential. Crown Opal does 180, and then during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from basic non-colorless Pokemon. So I haven't seen that put to good use yet, but this Terrapagos is a really, really good just beat stick attacker. And it also satisfies the Terra tag that we're going to need for a couple of cards in this deck. So the next new card we should look at here is Noctowl. It has the ability Jewel Seeker. Once during your turn, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, if you have any Terra Pokemon in play, that's where Terrapagos comes in. You may search your deck for up to 2 trainer cards. This effect is incredibly strong. One of my favorite parts about testing with Terrapagos decks, probably my favorite part about testing with Terrapagos decks, is that I can evolve this Noctowl and search for any 2 trainers. That's stadiums, supporters, items, tools. It's really, really strong. If it doesn't sound strong, I'm telling you it's strong, and if you think it's strong, it's stronger than you think. So Noctowl, incredibly powerful ability. In this specific variant, you'll likely be using that Jewel Seeker ability to find Feather Ball and Rare Candy, because then you Feather Ball for Pidgeot and Candy it down, and now you have your Quick Search every turn ready to go. So in this variant of the deck, Noctowl is most of the time just going to be the part that gets Pidgeot going, but in some other Terrapagos decks, it's the entire engine itself. Now we also have Fan Rotom, which helps our setup drastically. The ability Fan Call, once during your turn, you may search your deck for up to 3 colorless Pokemon with 100 HP or less, reveal them and put them into your hand, and you can only use this during your first turn, and you can't use more than 1 Fan Call ability during your turn. It also has Assault Landing that does 70 on a single prize Pokemon. Note that it only does 50 if you have a DTE attached. I definitely did not make that mistake myself. And then we have Bouffalant. Bouffalant with the ability Curly Wall. As long as you have at least 1 other Bouffalant in play, all of your basic colorless Pokemon take 60 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. This is pretty good. I don't know if it's really necessary in this style of deck, because I think it would just be better to add more of the Dusknoir line, more Rare Candy for the Dusknoir line, maybe more Night Stretcher. But the Bouffalant, it's hard to undersell it. It does stop 60 damage incoming, so your Terrapagos, now they have to do 290 to knock out. The problem I found is that this is a little underwhelming against decks with Dusknoir that can get around that extra damage. It's underwhelming against Raging Bolt, which has kind of an infinite damage output. And yeah, so essentially it's a little underwhelming against Charizard and Raging Bolt, which are the best 2 decks. So that's why I'm not sold on Bouffalant being the best use of this deck space, but I do enjoy Bouffalant as a card, and I do hope it gets to shine at some point, even if it's not right now. We're going to look at one more deck from this tournament here, the final 7-in-1 deck, which is a Dragapult Pidgeot deck. And we'll see a couple Dragapult Pidgeot decks today. This one is not playing the Dusknoir line, so it's very interesting to see players choosing, do I play the Dusknoir line, or do I play things like TMD Evolution and an extra Stadium card and Radiant Alakazam, which you'll see in this list. So Dragapult, of course, Phantom Dive, 200 damage and 6 damage counters wherever you like on the opponent's bench. You can now use that attack for 1 single energy because of Sparkling Crystal. When the Terra Pokemon this card is attached to uses an attack, that attack costs 1 energy less. The energy can be of any type. This is potentially the first time we've had a tool like this, or a card in general like this, that just removes a colored energy cost from the Pokemon and from any Pokemon that's Terra. So a very generally usable card, especially since all the Terra Pokemon that have been getting printed the past, however many sets since we've started getting Terra Pokemon. So a pretty generally usable card, even though it is that specific Terra. And then it takes away a colored energy cost from an attack, which is really, really broken. So you can use Phantom Dive, one of the most efficient attacks in the game, for just 1 energy. 1 energy to put 260 damage worth on the opponent's board is insane. This deck is also making use of Briar and also Crispin, which this is the first time we're talking about Crispin in this video. Supporter card that says search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards of different types, reveal them, put one into your hand, and attach the other to one of your Pokemon. So not only does Dragapult gain Sparkling Crystal, let's say Sparkling Crystal's prized, now you have Crispin. Crispin can also set this thing up to attack from 0 to 2 energy, just like Sparkling Crystal can let you go from 0 energy to 1 and then attach the crystal and you're good to attack. So Dragapult Pidgeot, I am a fan of this deck. I've been doing all of my practice and testing for this deck with the Dusknoir line in it, because I also really love what Dusknoir allows you to do. Can put your opponent purposely ahead so you can use Counter Catcher, or make better use of Iono, or even put your opponent down to specifically 2 so you can use Briar. So we'll have to see. I do think the better way to play Dragapult is with Dusknoir, but there are other cards in this list that you can't fit when you play Dusknoir, so there's definitely pros and cons on both sides. Moving on to the Late Night 205 from September 18th, which had 221 players in it. Some people are going to be unhappy with these results. Let's just get into it, because first place and second place are both Snorlax stall, but don't worry, the format's not dead. The game isn't broken. This is just because when people want to try new decks and a new metagame, they assume nobody's going to play Snorlax stall because that's unfun, so let's not tech for it, and then Snorlax stall dominates. It happens all the time. This is nothing new. So let's look at these Snorlax stall decks real quick, give them a little look-see. The thing to note here is that it has Sandshrew with the Sand Screen ability. Trainer cards in your opponent's discard pile can't be put into their deck by an effect of your opponent's item or supporter cards. So this stops Silene, it stops Palpad, it stops Team Yell's Cheer. So it's good against mirror matches of sorts. It's also just good against something that's playing like Toro plus Palpad. Now that Palpad doesn't do anything for you as long as Sandshrew's in play. We'll see that this specific stall list has just completely given up on trying to beat Lugia. They're just dodging Lugia. So there's no Sinnoh, there's no energy removal like Giacomo or Enhanced Hammer or Crushing Hammer. There is Handheld Fan, but I wouldn't really consider that energy removal, especially against a deck like Lugia that has seemingly infinite energy to work with. But they are playing Mist Energies to protect Mimikyu from other Mimikyus. So it protects your Mimikyu from Mew X using Ghost Eye against it, right? Because then the Mist Energy protects the damage counters. It also can protect your benched Pokemon from Phantom Dives from Dragapult. And I'm sure there's other things I'm missing that this Mist Energy can be used for. Let's look at the matchups that this player ran into. They went 10-2-1, winning the event. Their losses being a Raging Bolt and a Lugia. Like I said, they didn't tech for Lugia, but looking at the decks they were able to beat, we see they defeated multiple Charizard decks, multiple Raging Bolts, multiple Palkia V-Star decks with Noctowl and Terapagos, Dragapult, and Terapagos Dusknoir. So they did beat a pretty good spread of decks, losing of course to Lugia, and then losing to Raging Bolt, which might have just been a fluke, but going 10-1 to win this event. And then second place also played Snorlax stall. So let's just take a quick look at this. They're playing just the one Mist Energy, but they're also playing exactly 0 respect for Lugia. No Giacomo, no Temple of Sinnoh, just hoping to dodge that archetype. And let's see how that worked out for them. They got second place, eventually losing to the Mirror in finals because the Mirror was playing the Sandshrew. So that's the tech that really matters there. But this player was able to defeat 4 Gardevoir decks, some Raging Bolt, Miraidon, Charizard, Regidrago, and then it looks like intentional IDs against Raging Bolt and Dragapult. So next in third place, we've got Charizard Pidgeot. Charizard Pidgeot rocking the 2-1-2 Dusknoir line. I kind of like Night Stretcher over that second Dusknoir, but it is good to keep yourself from prizing your only Dusknoir. But if Dusknoir is not prized, I almost always would prefer that just be a Night Stretcher. You could also just cut the 3rd Charizard EX here for a Night Stretcher, maybe the 6th Fire Energy. I don't know. I really like Night Stretcher. Anyway, let's talk about the supporter lineup. I would switch the Arven and Iono. I would make it 4 Arven, 2 Iono. And also, by the way, I'm just picky about Charizard lists. I love Charizard Pidgeot. I think it's the best deck in this current format, as long as Regidrago stays underplayed. Regidrago is not bad, it's just being underplayed, but as long as it stays underplayed, then Charizard's going to reign supreme, I think. So yeah, I would make it 4 Arven, 2 Iono, especially because you have the unfair stamp that's kind of like an Iono effect, and like you have a lot of strong supporters here. A lot of times you're fine with just playing Arven for a counter catcher or for a Candy. Boss is really strong. Thornton's really good to change, like you could turn your Rotom into an extra Duskull or something. Toro is good for picking up liabilities or picking up a damaged Pokemon or just getting like a Radzard out of the active. And then of course Briar, very, very good, especially when we have the Dusknoir line to force our opponent to the amount of prize cards we want them to be at. So taking a look at the matchups of this 10-2 top 4 Charizard list, they lost exactly twice, and it was to the 1st place and 2nd place Snorlax stalled decks. They beat Gardevoirs, they beat Lugia, Raging Bolt, Dragapult, Regidrago, Goldingos. Wow, hitting 2 Goldingo in a row in a 220 person tournament. The odds for that are kind of crazy, especially when they were winning all their games. I don't know, Goldingo is not that good. Sorry for the Goldingo slander. I know somebody's always upset in the comments. So next we've got 4th place Gardevoir. But yeah, that Charizard list really good. It only lost to Stall. Keep that in mind. We've got Gardevoir next at 4th place, and there's not really anything interesting in this list to talk about. It's Gardevoir. It's playing the 2 TM Evolution, 2 Bravery Charm, 2 Dark and 2 Monkey Dory. Let's look at the matchups, because there's really nothing interesting to talk about deck list wise. Looks like a solid deck list, just nothing interesting to really talk about. So this lost to the 2nd place Snorlax stall twice, and it also lost to the 3rd place Charizard. So that's pretty good, right? The deck got 4th, and it only lost to the 2 decks ahead of it, in 3rd and 2nd place. It was able to defeat an Ancient Box, Miraidon, Lugia, Terrapagos, Pidgeot, Charizard, Raging Bolt, Regidrago, and Mirror Match. So pretty good showing from this 4th place Gardevoir as well. The last list we'll look at from this tournament is the 5th place Palkia V-Star deck. Palkia V-Star alongside the Noctowl, and then 2 choices of Terra Pokemon. This list is actually really, really sick, so let's get into it. So of course, Palkia V-Star, 280 health. Star Portal can let you accelerate 3 water energies from your discard to your water Pokemon in any way you like. And then Subspace Swell does 60 damage plus 20 more damage for each bench Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. So if you have Area 0 Underdepths in play, which gives you an 8 Pokemon bench, that's 160 damage for your bench and 60 damage for the base damage. That's 220. Then if your opponent just has the normal 5 Pokemon bench, that's 320 damage with Subspace Swell. So Palkia V-Star begins doing some incredible amounts of damage. Of course, we remember Noctowl. If you have a Terra Pokemon in play when you evolve it, you could search your deck for any 2 trainer cards. Absolutely busted ability. And we have 2 choices of Terra Pokemon here. We have the Terrapagos EX, but we also have the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon EX. It has the Terra Tag, it has Sob 20, which is a retreat lock attack, and then it has Torrential Pump, which for colorless water does 100 damage, and you could shuffle 3 energy attached to this Pokemon into your deck to do 120 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon as well. And we also have Radiant Greninja doing Moonlight Shuriken, which is 90-90. So the Teal Mask Ogerpon's Torrential Pump offers another Terra Pokemon that you can put on the bench, but it also offers what will sometimes be a better Moonlight Shuriken, depending if you want to hit the active or not. So you do a 100 and 120 snipe, so 220 damage total across the board, whereas Radiant Greninja's Moonlight Shuriken both goes to the bench, but it's limited to 180 total damage. So you get a little more bang for your buck with the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon, but 100 of that damage does have to go to the active, which makes Radiant Greninja still a worthwhile attack to consider. Now, this deck doesn't have infinite energy acceleration. You can only use that star portal once, and it can only go to water Pokemon. So this deck is also playing the Giovanni's Charisma supporter, which is a really cool supporter that doesn't get a lot of love. Put an energy attached to your opponent's active into their hand, and then if you do, attach an energy card from your hand to your active Pokemon. So it disrupts the opponent a little bit, but it also accelerates an energy for you, making it a little easier to attack with your Palkia or maybe your Terrapagos EX. Next, we're moving on to the Late Night 206, also held on September 18th with 268 players. And we've got Charizard Pidgeot taking first place. So in that first Late Night, you saw Snorlax. Snorlax is the top 2. It's going to be very different here in the later night, Late Night that happened on the same day. Let's take a look at this Charizard EX, Pidgeot EX deck list. They are also rocking the Dusknoir line, which I think is just pretty much mandatory at this point. Also has the supporter lineup I was referencing for Arven 2 Iono instead of a 3-3 split. They've also got some other things I was mentioning, so this list is a lot more to my liking than to the one that we looked at prior. Running the Night Stretcher, running a Mist Energy instead of the 5th basic Fire. Pretty good across the board deck list. You'll also see 3 Nest Ball. So I know in the previous format, a lot of Charizards were opting to choose first blindly in case they're playing against Regidrago, because going first against Drago is so important. Now, if Drago is really just going to be like a 5, 6, 7% meta share, it might be fine to go back to choosing second again, just because this deck has really powerful starts going second. And if you do choose second, maybe you fit a Cleffa in there instead of the Manaphy or instead of the 3rd Nest Ball, because Cleffa is really, really sick going second. Just a really great card overall. But yeah, Charizard, Pidgeot, Dusknoir, probably the best deck in format. Let's look at what this player's matchups were. So they went 12-1, losing a single time to, you guessed it, Snorlax stall. But across the tournament, that was their only loss. They were able to defeat 4 Terrapagos EX variants, Raging Bolt, multiple mirror matches, Roaring Moon EX, Pidgeot Control, Miraidon, Cloth Electrode, and Lost Zone Box. So they hit quite a spread of decks. They only hit 1 Raging Bolt, so you know it would be interesting to see across more matches against that deck how many times Briar can make a difference. They also didn't hit any Regidrago, but like I said, that deck is seemingly less popular by a large margin right now. We'll have to see if that fixes itself as we move on in this format. Second place was Roaring Moon EX, a very simple, very turbo streamlined build of Roaring Moon EX, similar to what we saw get second place at the World Championships in the Masters division this year. Using that Pekkarunt for mobility, using Pheasantipity for draw, and Roaring Moon, the baby Roaring Moon, as a single prize attacker, either to weave in for the prize trade or just to get through things like Mimikyu and Aegislash. So this Roaring Moon went 10-2-1, taking its 2 losses to Pidgeot, Terrapagos, and to the first place Charizard deck. Was able to defeat multiple Dragapults, Lugia, Chien-Pao, some Charizards, Iron Thorns, Hisuian Zorak V-Star, and Giratina Lost Zone. So some definitely lower tier decks there in this deck's run, but nonetheless went with an impressive record of 10-1. Then we've got 2 Terrapagos Pidgeot EX decks in 3rd and 4th place. We already looked at the 4th place one from a previous tournament with very little changes, so we'll just look at the 3rd place one here, going 10-2. So this one, playing most of the same things as the other one we looked at, so that's why we're not going to look at both of these because they're so similar. Running the Noctowl line, Terrapagos EX, Pidgeot EX, the 2-1-2 Dusknoir, the Briar. This one's running Colress's Tenacity, The Feather Ball, like I said, a really good combo to go Noctowl for Feather Ball Candy, get your Pidgeot set up. But yeah, I'm still not sold on the Bouffalon over more of the Dusknoir line. I've been really impressed by what you can do with like Turbo Terrapagos with a lot of Dusknoir. So pretty solid looking list, and they had a great record of 10-2. So let's look at what the matchups were here. They lost to the Cloth Electrode deck. We're going to have to take a look at that one. And they also lost to the first place Charizard in top 4. They were able to defeat a Cornerstone stall deck, Dragapult Pidgeot, Blissey, 3 Snorlax stalls. So this is looking to have a fantastic matchup against Snorlax stall. A Regidrago, a Roaring Moon, Raging Bolt, Lugia, and I think I said Roaring Moon already. So yeah, let's move on to the 4th place decks matchup. Like I said, we don't need to look at the deck list. It's pretty much the same, but we'll look at the matchups for this one that went 9-3. Losing against Charizard, losing against Snorlax stall. Okay, so maybe it's not as free as we thought, but they did beat 2 other Snorlax stalls, and losing to Roaring Moon in the top 4. So I think both of these lost to Charizard, which is definitely a concern. Like I said, I don't think the Bouffalon helps against Charizard or against Raging Bolt. I think just more Dusknoir would be better against those matchups. And let's take a look at this 5th place Chien-Pao deck. Yeah, unfortunately, nothing too exciting to note here, guys. Just a pretty boring looking Chien-Pao deck. Really nothing to note. Maybe the Silene, I guess you could say the Silene is something cool to note, but we've seen it before. Let's look at the matchups, because the deck list doesn't leave much to be desired. They went 8-2-1, losing in top 8, eventually losing to the 2nd place Roaring Moon, and they also lost to Cloth Electrode. So why don't we look at Cloth Electrode? Cloth Electrode got 9th at this tournament, going 8-2. Cloth, if you're unaware, does Unhinged Scissors, 30 damage plus 160 more if this Pokemon is affected by a special condition, so it does 190. You're typically going to be poisoning yourself and the opponent with Brute Bonnet's Toxic Powder, so that 190 is technically going up to 200 because of poison. But then you could do 40 more with Binding Moki, so that's 240 if you're also including poison. But then you can also have Radiant Hisuian Sneasler to make that poison more, so now I think we're up to 260 after poison. And then we also have Cobalion, so if you're against a dark type Pokemon, you could do even more, bringing that up to 290 for the Cloth's attack. But Double Turbo brings it down by 20, so capping that out at 270 after the Double Turbo's damage reduction. This deck also plays the Baby Pekkarunt. As long as this Pokemon's in the active spot, put 5 more damage on your opponent's poison Pokemon during Pokemon checkup. So between this and Hisuian Sneasler, you can bring damage from poison up to 8 damage counters between each turn. So even if you're not attacking, you could still use Toxic Powder to poison the opponent and then just leave them taking 8 between turns. That being said, I think this is kind of a fragile deck that needs exactly Double Turbo to attack. It needs the special conditions to all fall in the right order, being able to use those, the Brute Bonnet with Ancient Booster Energy Capsule on it. But it is built to do that, you know, with the for Arven, with Secret Box, Colress's Tenacity, Seal Stone, and the Hisuian Electrode V plus the Lumineon V. So yeah, it is built to do these things, and it had a pretty good record of 8-2. So let's look at its matchups. It ended up losing in top 16 in the asymmetrical cut, I think, to Miraidon. And it lost in Swiss round 9 to the eventual first place Charizard Pidgeot deck. But up until then, it went 8-0. It beat Terrapagos, 2 versions of Terrapagos. It beat 2 Charizard Pidgeot decks, Chien-Pao, Raging Bolt, Gardevoir, Snorlax stall. So had a pretty good run up until round 9 and then the asymmetrical cut. And the final tournament we'll look at is from September 19th with 176 participants. The first place deck list going 8-1 was Dragapult EX with Xatu. I am admittedly not a fan of the Xatu build. I love Pidgeot EX. It's pretty good. It has a free computer search every turn. But this player was able to make it work with Dragapult Xatu. Also using that new Crispin, but not needing the Sparkling Crystal A-Spec because they have Xatu for energy acceleration. Let's look at the matchups of this first place 8-1 deck. Their only loss was to a Raging Bolt, but they got it back, beating that same Raging Bolt in top 4 and then another Raging Bolt in the finals. This was a bit of a shorter tournament, so just 6 rounds into top 8. It's a little less validity than the other tournaments that we looked at. We have second and third place being Raging Bolt at this tournament. This list is pretty interesting for Raging Bolt. So it's using 2 Crispins. So if you miss your Professor Sadas, you still have Crispins, which is pretty cool. I do think, though, because of Crispin being in this deck and you're playing 2 of it, which makes me think like it's almost something you're relying on at points, you really want to have Super Rod in the deck because Crispin needs to find 2 kinds of energy. If it only finds 1 kind of energy, it just turns into an energy search. So it's pretty bad if there's only 1 type of energy in your deck. So not seeing Super Rod in this list is confusing. Definitely an oversight on the deck list builder. But they are also using the new single prize Raging Bolt, which is cool. For the Thunder Burst Storm attack, this attack does 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each energy attached to this Pokemon. So you could snipe something, or you could just do Dragon Headbutt 130 into the active. And the last list we're going to look at here is a 6-1-1 Hisuian Arcanine deck that got 5th place in this tournament. So Hisuian Arcanine, you might not have seen this card for a while. It has a free attack, very vulnerable, 10 damage, and if you have no cards in your hand, it does 150 more. So it attacks for free every turn, doing 160 as long as you have no cards in your hand. And then you use the Radiant Venusaur's Sunny Bloom at the end of your turn after your attack. Draw cards until you have 4 cards in your hand. And the real reason I think this deck was able to go, I think, 6-1-1 was because of Neutralization Zone. They probably hit enough people that didn't have an out to Neutralization Zone. Prevent all damage done to Pokemon that don't have a rule box from the opponent's Pokemon EX and V. So essentially you just make your Hisuian Arcanine unbeatable while you're swinging 160 for free every turn. Pretty cool idea. I think it's way too gimmicky to actually be a real thing, but they were able to go 6-1-1 at this tournament. If you're interested in playing in online Pokemon TCG Live events, just check out play.limitlesstcg.com. It's the only place you need for online tournaments and online tournament data. If you enjoyed today's video, please subscribe for more Pokemon TCG content, and you can check out ways to support my channel in the description down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.